All right, we talked about recycling. Okay, so we looked at, actually, I don't know if we got to this graph, but according to the graph, okay, this is recycling in the U.S. So what can you say about recycling in the U.S.? This is total MSW. Remember, MSW stands for Municipal Solid Waste. We're talking about homes and towns. This is the percent they're recycling. Is in orange, and then the blue is the total amount of recycling in millions of tons. So from this graph, according to the graph, we're underneath open loop recycling. What can we say? It has been increasing, right? So what can you say about recycling in the past 50 years? It is increasing, okay? So we're going to talk about what things are beneficial to recycle. Obviously, we would like to recycle everything, but the problem is that sometimes it takes more money for us to recycle something than it does to just make something brand new. So for example, glass bottles. If I want to recycle a glass bottle, it takes way more energy to heat that glass up, melt it down, turn it into a new glass bottle than it does to just make a brand new bottle, okay? So it's cheaper for me just to make a brand new bottle than it is to recycle, so why would I recycle then? Obviously it's good for the planet, but if it's going to cost me more money, that's a problem. So it takes more energy to recycle plastic and glass than it does to create new problems. Or new products. This is not cost effective. Sometimes you will hear that there's not a market, okay? Not a market, meaning that it isn't cost effective and people don't really want to buy it because it's not worth a lot of money. So if we look at some of these charts down here, average recycled content of beverage containers. So out of all of my aluminum cans, 70% of them are made from recycled materials. Out of all my plastic bottles, only 3% are made out of recycled. And out of glass, only 23%. Okay? What about recycling rates? How much of this stuff do we recycle? Well, we recycle 49% of aluminum. We recycle a lot of aluminum. Okay? Plastic, we recycle 30%. Glass, 39%. But here's where the kicker is, the value, okay? If we look at the value per ton, aluminum, for a ton of aluminum, it's $1,000. That's why you can take your aluminum cans and go turn them into the recycling center and get money for them because they're valuable, okay? Plastic, though, you only get $226 for turning in a ton of plastic. Glass, in order to recycle it, you would have to pay somebody $17 for every ton to recycle it. So you're actually losing money to recycle glass. So now do you understand why we don't have a lot of recycled glass bottles? Because it takes more money to actually recycle it than it does to create new ones. Okay? All right. Also, if we look at this, this is showing you the efficiency. Okay, how much value we're able to create from recycling these things. Aluminum can create a lot of value, okay, in terms of the amount of energy put in, we're creating a lot of value, okay. Small electronic appliances, less lamps, less batteries, aluminum coffee capsules, and plastic bags are at the top. They're the most inefficient thing that we can recycle, meaning it takes a lot of energy and a lot of money in order to recycle them. Okay. If we look at this graph, this is showing us the value of recyclables over time. So plastic bottles are in blue. Okay. We get cans, aluminum, cardboard, newsprint. Notice they all, with the exception of plastic bottles, they all kind of have this downward trend. Okay, so recycled materials are decreasing in value, meaning you're not going to get as much to recycle them as you used to a long time ago, which is a problem because then it's cheaper. Yeah. So the most efficient one that we saw is aluminum. Sorry, thank you for that. So the most efficient thing to recycle is aluminum. Okay, so aluminum, and you see that aluminum down here. So the most efficient thing that you're writing in your notes packet is aluminum. So aluminum is very efficient to recycle, and that's why a lot of our aluminum is recycled. okay? One of the things that we're going to look at is the value of recycling plastic and why it's not really valuable to actually recycle it. So one other form of recycling is composting. And composting is when you just take plant material, usually food scraps from vegetables, to create organic matter or to create soil. So you can put the word soil here if you don't want to write organic matter. Remember we said the word organic means what? What does the word organic mean? Yep, so organic agriculture means they don't use pesticides. Organic in a chemistry kind of sense means that it came from something that's living, right? So like organic fertilizer would be, came from a cow, right? Like manure, okay? Or organic matter in soil could be things like leaves and organisms. And so what happens is you take your food scraps, you put them in layers with some dirt, with some grass, okay, and then over time it turns into dirt. Now, I don't actually, my parents never did this. We never did this growing up. My parents have a lot of land. We just chucked our food in the woods and let it decompose. So we have a lot of woods on our land. And so anything, any like vegetable scraps or like, oh, if there was like an apple that was rotten, we would just chuck it in the woods. So the thing is when you throw away food, and we're going to talk about this, and you throw it in the trash instead of putting it out in the land, it doesn't decompose. You know, if you were to throw an apple core into the dirt somewhere, it would eventually decompose. Well, when we throw an apple core into the trash, it goes into a landfill, and stuff in a landfill doesn't decompose. We'll look at that in a second. So what do you typically compost? Fruits and veggies, paper towels, coffee grounds, tea bags, eggshells. No meat or dairy, liquids, trash, or recyclable. So mostly it's just plant matter, plant stuff, okay? So when we look at solid waste, we have 3 different options of things that we can do with it. We can put in a landfill, we can burn it, or we can bury it. So these are our 3 options. The most common place that our waste, or solid waste, ends up is in a landfill, okay? So what happens to most municipal solid waste? It ends up in a landfill. So 52% ends up in a landfill, 25% is recycled, and 8% is composted, and the other goes to, gets burned to produce energy, okay? All right, so this is an excerpt. You don't need to write anything down for this. Here's this guy. He did a study on landfills, okay, in like, I think it was the 90s. He went and he dug up stuff in landfills. I know, sounds really exciting, right? So he went to landfills, which are basically big pits of trash that are covered up, and he dug them up, and he wanted to look at how things were decomposing. So he wrote, conventional wisdom held that much of the trash in landfills would quickly decompose. Instead, organic materials like food and lawn waste were found mummified in the airless depths of sanitary landfills. Items like hot dogs and lettuce that had been entombed for years looked as if they had just been recently thrown out. Decades-old newspapers were still intact and readable. Construction materials, originally thought to be virtually non-existent in landfills, actually accounted for a significant portion of waste. So he went and he dug up stuff in landfills. And what he found is that even though the stuff had been in landfills for 30 years, you could just look at these like oranges and apples and they look like they just had been thrown out. Like sure, they weren't in pristine condition, but they really hadn't decomposed. Okay? And so then we have to ask ourselves why, right? Does this happen in all landfills? Yes. Okay, stuff does not decompose in a landfill. So let's look at decomposition rates. How long does it take to decompose? Paper towel, 2 to 4 weeks if we're just throwing it out in the dirt somewhere, okay? Newspaper, 1.5 months. Apple core, 2 months, okay? Wool sock, a year. Milk carton, 5 years. Yeah. Plastic cup, 50 years. Aluminum can, 200 years. Now this is if we throw it in the dirt, right? Here's the problem. Things decompose if they have access to air, moisture, and organic material. Landfills do not have access to these things. Okay? There is not air in a landfill. Okay? There's a little bit of air, but not enough air. Okay? Moisture, some, and organic material. So the problem is landfills basically act like a big, like you said, mummified, like a big tomb where stuff just gets mummified and doesn't decompose. One of the reasons, yes. So a sanitary landfill, here's where you're writing it down. What is a sanitary landfill? It is a facility designed to hold MSW, municipal solid waste, with as little contamination of the surrounding area as possible. So we're going to look at how a landfill is constructed. Okay, you'll notice it's basically a pit. They dig a big pit. Okay, they put all the garbage in there. And they have some pipes. So these pipes do certain things. We're going to talk about what these pipes do. Okay, so there's pipes that go in there. You'll notice there's a liner here. Okay, so what we want to do, like imagine if you're making a swimming pool. Okay, well, you can't just dig a hole in the dirt and fill it with water, because what's going to happen? What happens if I dig a hole in the ground and try to fill it up with water and make a swimming pool? It's going to go into all of the surrounding dirt, right? Well, that's going to be a problem with all of my waste here. Remember all those batteries you weren't supposed to throw in the garbage? All those toxic chemicals, those cleaners, those paints? Well, yeah, they're going to leak into the ground. That's going to be a problem. Right? So we're going to put a liner down. Some kind of piece of plastic or clay. Okay? So, construction of a landfill. We have, sorry, write small. You have 6 bullet points to fit in here. 4 and then 2 on the next one. I know, sorry. So there's a clay or plastic liner at the bottom to prevent leaking, okay? Leaking into the groundwater. So it could be just a piece of plastic, or it could be a layer of clay. Will clay crack? Is that what you said? There's usually enough moisture from the surrounding soil that it doesn't, and then they would make it thick enough too. So clay has to be, it has to dry out for there to be cracks in it. So the problem then, let's say it rains on my trash, and all of my rain, right, even though I'm going to put a cover on this, my rainwater goes through, and it picks up all of those chemicals I wasn't actually supposed to throw in the garbage. And now at the bottom of my landfill, I've got all of this like liquid that's like really toxic. Okay? Well, we call this leachate. Okay? It's all the liquid that's toxic, and we have pipes at the bottom to collect all of it. So all the liquid kind of like drains down, and it's all really toxic and gross. And we collect all of it, and we send it to the water treatment plant. It's a place where like all your sewage goes to make the water not gross, basically. Okay. So we compact it into cells. What's a cell? Well, they just put some trash in there and compact it down, and put some more trash in there and compact it down. The whole concept of cells is not super important. And then on the top, we put a layer of soil and clay, because we don't want like a ton of water coming in. Now water's still going to get in, but on the top we're going to put clay and soil. So if you see a landfill just looks like a really big hill, usually with grass, and it's got some pipes sticking out of it. Okay? So a cap of soil and clay. Now, here's the problem, though. Inside of the landfill, there's not a whole lot of oxygen. We need oxygen in order for things to decompose. So what happens, if you remember from biology, is something called anaerobic respiration. Okay? So anaerobic respiration occurs, and it produces methane. You might be wondering what GHG, this stands for greenhouse gas. So remember we talked about what's another greenhouse gas that causes climate change? Carbon dioxide, right? Well, methane is like, forget the number, a whole bunch times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Okay? If carbon dioxide is like a nice little sheet that keeps our planet warm, methane is like a down blanket, like smothering our entire planet. Okay? Methane is super, super powerful, super strong greenhouse gas. And so we're producing methane, and that's going into the atmosphere, and it's causing our environment to heat up. You'll also hear about this with cows, right? We talked about the organisms, they produce methane. It's those same bacteria that live in their gut, they're producing methane, and that's what's ending up leaving the cow. So sometimes methane is collected, and we can burn it to produce electricity. Just like you guys know you have like a stove that runs on natural gas, okay? You can light that gas and create heat. They can do that in a power plant as well, and then that heat turns a turbine and it generates electricity. So it has some benefits, okay? All right, you need to watch for a video on notes for me over the long weekend, 20 minutes. That's what I need of your time.